Hi, I'm Katarina Johnson-Thompson and I'm so excited to be celebrating Disney's Ultimate Princess celebration ahead of World Kindness Day. This global campaign uses the stories of Disney's beloved princesses to inspire courage and kindness. Earlier this year, Disney released Tales of Courage and Kindness, a new story collection featuring 14 never-before-told stories and illustrations of Disney's queens and princesses. Disney hopes that these stories will inspire courage and spark small acts of kindness around the world. What's your kindness act for World Kindness Day? Now I'm going to read Moana's story, which I hope you enjoy. Let's begin. The Ocean Gardens. 8-year-old Moana glided underwater along the amber and gold speckled seafloor of Motunui Beach, admiring a string of sparkling seashells, when suddenly she came face to face with two large, deep green eyes. Her heart soared. It was Whanu, a sea turtle she had known her whole life. Long ago, when they were both little, Moana had saved Whanu from a few very hungry birds, holding a leaf over the turtle as she scampered across the sand into the sea. Moana never knew if Whanu remembered that day, but as she would soon discover, the turtle never forgot. Whanu dove deeper and Moana followed. There beneath the waves, the water grew quiet and calm, a welcome change to the hustle and bustle on Motunui Island, where Moana would one day lead her people as chief. More than anything, Moana loved these moments for her special friend. Time for a breath as Moana fluttered up to the surface. A muffled sound tumbled into her ears. "Moana," her mother Sina called her from the shore. "Moana, where are you?" Moana pierced through the water surface. "Right here, Mum." "Almost time to come in," Sina said. She pointed to the horizon. "Look at those faraway clouds. What are they telling you?" Moana treaded water as she studied them, just as Sina taught her to do, just as her ancestors had for generations. The signs from nature, like skies, winds and seas, helped her people predict oncoming weather. Those clouds are low, dark and thick and heading our way, which means stormy seas are coming. Sina smiled proudly. Just then, she heard a chirp. "Hi, Whanu," Sina greeted the turtle, who popped her head above the waters. "No wonder you were underwater for so long, Moana," Sina said, her eyes twinkling. "Turtles are such special creatures. Especially Whanu," Moana beamed. "I'm glad she has you, and that you have her too," Sina added softly. They watched the turtle slip back into sea. "One more dive of Whanu, and then we'll leave," Moana asked. Sina thought it was over. She rubbed her arms as the wind began to gust. "Okay," she agreed. "Just one more, but make it quick." "I will," Moana promised. She filled her lungs with air and dove back down. Underwater, large bunches of jade green seaweed bounced spiritedly on the seafloor. The seaweed direction made Moana pause. She could tell the seaweed was being carried out to the deep by a strong current, one that could very well take her there too, but only if she wasn't careful. Just then, Whanu zipped by, chirping merrily, as she crunched on the beakfuls of the bountiful sea veggies. Moana giggled. Turtles could be so silly. For a little while longer, they continued their dive, exploring a nearby rocky reef teeming with sea life. When it was time for a breath, Moana waved goodbye to Whanu. Then she began her ascent, extending her arms overhead and pulling them back behind while kicking vigorously. Despite her effort, she didn't travel very far. "That's odd," she thought. So she tried again, but the result was the same. She must have been caught in the current. "Stay calm," she reminded herself. Now is not the time to panic. Finally, she neared the surface, where the sound of thundering waves crashed into her ears. Moana's heart pounded. The signs were undeniable. The stormy seas had arrived. She needed to get to shore, now. Moana resurfaced and gulped in a breath. Treading in place, she looked for the beach. There, it was far away, about the coconut tree's distance from it. As the undertow continued to pull her out to sea, she weighed her options. She could try to escape the current by swimming parallel to the shoreline, or she could relax and let the water take her out to the deep, where all would release her. Then she could swim around it, back to shore. A large wave made the decision for her. It pummeled her and drove her down so far that her eyes hurt from the pressure. She paddled her arms and kicked her legs until she burst through the surface of the water once again. Her heart dropped when she saw that she was now the length of 2 coconut trees away from the shore. In the distance, she saw Sina dive into the water. "Mum!" Moana yelled, waving both hands back and forth above her head. "Over here!" But it was too late. A mountainous wave engulfed Moana. Before she knew it, she was deeper underwater than she'd ever been before, and losing the energy to swim. As the frigid water squeezed the air out of her lungs, a thick black fog began to fill her vision. Suddenly, she heard a familiar chirp and felt a gentle tug on her wrist. It was Fonu. Moana curled her fingertips around the rim of the turtle's shell and held on as Fonu glided upwards. As they broke the surface, Moana drew in a few big breaths. Then Fonu looked back at her. All at once, the memory of baby Fonu swimming away safely into sea all those years ago flooded back into Moana's mind. "You remembered," she whispered. The turtle chirped quietly. "Thank you." Moana strengthened her grip on Fonu's shell and held her breath as the turtle drove back to the ocean. Then Fonu soared under the waves to return Moana safely, meeting her mother in the shallows. Before long, Moana found herself on the shore in Sina's arms. She hunched over and coughed up water. Sina gently patted her back. "Are you okay?" Moana nodded. Sina cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, Moana. I should have never let you take that last dive. The sea changed so quickly and I thought we had more time." "So did I," Moana responded. "Now I know better." They hugged each other tightly. "If I tell you something," Moana continued, "do you promise to believe me?" "I will always believe you, Moana," Sina said. "Fonu saved me." "I know," Sina breathed. "I saw." Moana felt a warm tear roll down her cheek. Deep down, she'd known her mother would believe her, but the proof overwhelmed her with relief. Sina reached for Moana's hands. "When I was old enough, about your age, my grandmother, your great-grandmother, taught me that our ancestors watched over us through the turtles that called the waters surrounding Motunui their home." Moana followed Sina's gaze as her mother looked out to the open ocean. Together, they watched Fonu lift her head above the water one more time and then disappear into the deep. Sina turned back to Moana. "My grandmother said we must always protect our ocean guardians, and they will protect us in return. She made me promise to watch over them. Today, Fonu protected you. Now, Moana, it's your turn. Will you protect Fonu and all of our ocean guardians with me?" "I promise to protect Fonu and all the guardians of the sea," Moana repeated proudly. "Now, Moana," she said, "you must also promise that you will never again go into the water when the signs warn of stormy seas. Nature doesn't give second chances." "I promise, Mum," Moana replied. She forced a smile, but inside, Sina's warning made her shudder. No, Moana would never forget the power of the ocean, nor would she ever shake the feeling of almost losing her breath in the cold, deep water. So why would she ever put herself in that danger again? By the age of 16, Moana had assumed many duties in her role as future chief. She believed leadership to be a great privilege, and she spent many of her days caring for her people and their island. But the responsibility came at a cost. Diving with Fonu became a rare opportunity. Still, every day, no matter her schedule, she took a trip to the beach to check on her friend. One morning, outside of her family's folly, their open-air home, Moana noticed a billow of low and thick clouds rolling in from the horizon. She sucked in a sharp breath. These signs were all too familiar. Sina stepped up behind her. Moana pointed to the horizon. "Do you see those clouds? They look just like they did that day." Her hair stood on end, but she tried her best to shrug off her fear. She was older, stronger, and wiser now, and she had the responsibility as future chief to warn her people about all dangers, including a stormy ocean. She spun around to face her mother. "I'm going to the beach to make sure no one steps a foot into the sea. My brave girl," Sina said, reaching for Moana's shoulders. "Just promise me that you'll protect yourself as much as you protect everyone else." Moana nodded firmly. "Okay then," Sina replied. "I'll be right here if you need me." Moana kissed her mother and raced to the beach. There, the waves thundered and crashed, creating a deafening sound rivaled only by the wind that howled and screeched. The seas were already very stormy, just as Moana had predicted. She shielded her eyes from the sand that whipped into her face as she surveyed the ocean for swimmers. On one end of the beach, two fishermen emerged from the pounding shore break. Moana dashed over to them as they pulled themselves up into the sand. "Are you alright?" "We're okay," one fisherman heaved, "but we've lost everything. Our best net, two of our traps, the waves, they were like mountains, they came out of nowhere." "Did you see anybody else out there?" Moana asked. "No, just us," he replied. Moana let out a quick sigh of relief. "We'll have to wait out the weather before coming back to salvage our nets and traps." Moana watched the fishermen trudge away and then turned her attention back to the ocean. Its choppy white crests crashed together, forming a fog of sea spray that burned Moana's eyes. A person would have to be really gutsy to swim in the ocean at a time like this, she mused to herself. Moana was turning away to leave the beach when, just at that moment, an unusual sight caught her eye. On the surface of the water, a little brown spot floated. It looked like something was caught in the fishing net. She squinted her eyes to get a better look. Then a tangled turtle came into focus. "Whānau!" she cried. Moana dashed to the waterline. Her heart drummed in her chest. She had promised Sina she would never go out into the stormy sea. She'd almost drowned last time, after all, but she had also vowed to protect Whānau. Into the water she dove. Down, down, down she swam, under the waves. They shook her ferociously, to and fro, and she struggled to hold her breath. But even the raging sea could not stop her from helping her friend. Moana resurfaced next to Whānau. The turtle chirped and tried to paddle her flippers, but the net bound them in place. Whānau was in trouble. As Moana fumbled with the slippery rope, a set of waves roared towards them. Thinking quickly, Moana balled up the net and wedged it in between her and Whānau. Then she grabbed the sides of Whānau's shell and turned towards the shore. "We're going under," she exclaimed. She heard the turtle blow out air. Then Moana duck-dived down under the waves, holding Whānau in front of her and in the net between them, kicking with all her might. Her lungs burned like fire, and her aching legs passed the point of exhaustion, but she kept kicking. At last they arrived on the shore. The same turtle that glided weightlessly through the water was so heavy on land. Moana drove her legs into the sand and cried out in agony as she pushed Whānau out from the water's reach. Whānau chirped weakly. "Don't worry, Whānau," Moana panted. "I'll help you." She took a hold of the net and ran her fingers along the rope until she found where it was knotted. Her people were a master of net makers, and this knot was very complicated. She'd need something sharp to cut it, and a little extra help. "I'll be right back," she called to Whānau as she ran towards the village. A few moments later, Moana burst into her family's folly. To her surprise, she saw no sign of Sina. "Up here," Sina called, and then jumped down from a post. She wiped the sweat from her brow and looked up. "The wind is really doing a number on our roof." Sina glanced at Moana and then levelled her gaze. "Why are you soaking wet?" "Mum, don't get upset, but I need your help. We need your help." "Who's we?" "Me and Whānau. She's trapped in a net. We need something to cut it. I had to swim out." "You what?" Sina threw her hands in the air. "Moana, what is wrong with you?" Moana gulped down tears. "I made a promise to Whānau that I would protect her. You made a promise to my great-grandmother that you would protect turtles like her too. I'm sorry, Mum, that I've upset you, but Whānau needs our help right now, and I can't do it alone. Will you help me?" Sina paused, then she grabbed her sharp stone adze. "This will slice through anything. Let's go." Back on the sand, Moana found Whānau twisted tighter in the twine. Her stomach sickened when she noticed that one of the turtle's flippers was extended in an unnatural way. "She's trying to get back into the water," Moana said urgently. "We need to move quickly." Sina's eyes flashed. She dropped to her knees and grabbed the rope. Moana held on to the other end where it was knotted. Sina rubbed the rock adze back and forth under the knot until the rope split apart. Then she wove the ends over, under, around and through to untangle the trapped turtle. Once freed, Whānau flapped her flippers. Moana pumped her fist into the air. "Mum, you did it!" she hollered. "Now let's get her back into the water." They each grabbed one side of Whānau's shell. Like guiding a canoe into the sea, they carefully pushed her head first across the sand until she floated on the water. But the poor turtle was too exhausted to swim through the treacherous shore break. When the wave crashed onto her, she tumbled back onto the sand. They tried again. "Now!" Moana yelled, in between rows of rumbling whitewater. This time they pushed Whānau hard. The turtle skimmed hard across the water's surface from the force. As the wave approached her, she paddled her flippers and crested over it. As Whānau disappeared behind the wave, Moana curled up her hands around her mouth and let out a big cheer. "Woohoo!" But then the water levelled, exposing a behemoth wave barreling towards Whānau. "Oh no!" Sina cried, as the wave sucked up the turtle and spat her back out onto the sand. A pain shot through Moana's chest. Her palms got sweaty and her knees felt weak. "Stay calm," she thought. Now is not the time to panic. She closed her eyes and listened to the tempestuous ocean, asking for a sign. Suddenly, a quiet filled her ears. It was a cold quiet, the sound of the deep. The place, Moana realised, where Whānau needed to be, under the waves. She opened her eyes and gazed resolutely into the sea. Just then, as if Sina had read her mind, Moana felt her mother's finger interlace with hers. "I trust you," Sina said. Moana turned to her mother and squeezed her hand. "Follow my lead." Back to Whānau they both ran. There once again, they grabbed each side of Whānau's shell and slid her into the water. But this time, 1, 2, 3, Moana shouted as they dove in with the turtle. Down, down, down they swam, holding Whānau in front of them as they kicked with all their might, following the ocean floor. The current pushed them into every direction, but they kept swimming. Soon they arrived at the drop-off point, where the seafall fell away and the deep ocean began. Sina held Moana's hand to the side of Whānau's shell that she held and wrapped Moana's fingers around it. Moana nodded at Sina, then Sina lowered her legs, planted her feet into the sand, and gave Moana a great push. The push propelled Moana into the cold, quiet waters where Whānau had saved her life years before, the place where Moana knew Whānau would be safe. All at once, the turtle began to paddle her flippers, and with a mighty flap, Whānau descended into the deep. Joy rippled through Moana, but the celebration would have to wait. She still had to swim back to shore. She took a big stroke and thought of Whānau, her beloved friend who had protected her all those years. She stroked again, thinking of her mother, who trusted her and helped her protect their friend. And with another stroke, she thought of her ancestors, who, like her, protected the great turtles of the deep and were protected by them in return. In the shallows, Sina wrapped her arms around Moana and lifted her out the water. They hobbled to the shore and collapsed on the sand under the safety of a pandanus tree. For a moment, they sat in silence, taking in the experience they had just shared. Then Sina turned to Moana. "My brave, brave girl," she said, cupping Moana's face. "You saved Whānau, and you honoured our family's duty to protect our ocean guardians." Moana placed her hands over her mother's. "No, Mum," she said, "we did. We did it together. Great-grandmother would be so proud of us." Sina's eyes sparkled. "You're right. My little minnow. She would be. I know I am." Moana leaned in and pressed her nose and forehead against her mother's. Sina pressed back. "I love you, Mum," said Moana, as they released their hongai. "And I love you too, Moana," Sina replied. Just then, rain began pouring from the skies. "We should probably head home," Sina said with a laugh, holding out her hand to Moana, who lifted herself up against it. "You know, Mum," Moana winked, "our people say that rain is a blessing." "I know," Sina said, playfully nudging Moana with her hip. "I taught you that, but you want to know something else?" "What?" asked Moana, offering her arm to her mother. Sina took Moana's arm. "You're my blessing," she said with a squeeze. Together they walked home, drenched from the rain, grateful for each other and for the guardians of the sea.